Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Welcome to another episode 226 of the Marketing Your Practice podcast. Let me ask you a question. How would your practice, and maybe how would chiropractic be different if your message was as easily shared or as viral as the latest internet trend? Like if everybody knew about it? I think the answer is pretty simple. Things would be very, very different. On the podcast today, I'm going to be doing something different. I'm joined with my great friend, Dr. Martin Harvey, and we're going to be discussing a book here called Made to Stick. It's Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die. Martin and I are a part of a book club, and we get together once a month and we read through books like this and we bring together our take-home messages. And I thought that this would be a really fantastic one to share on the podcast. Simply put, the more sticky your message is, the more people understand it, then the bigger impact, reach, more income that you'll have in your practice, the more lives that you'll be able to change. There are 6 steps of a sticky message. This book is a literal roadmap that will help you implement this. So we'll walk you through each of those 6 steps and let you know things that you can start to do in your practice this afternoon, tomorrow, whenever you're next in there. Please let me know if this episode was valuable. If you've enjoyed this kind of format, then this can be something that Martin and I and perhaps other guests can do in the future. So certainly Martin and I are reading books and discussing them like this all the time. If it's helpful, then please reach out, let me know, and we'll make sure that we do it more often. All right, that's enough talking from me. Let's go and talk to Martin.
Welcome to the Marketing Your Practice podcast, where we guide natural health and wellness experts through the pitfalls of marketing. Each episode, you'll learn simple, effective, easily actionable, and heart-centered marketing strategies. And here's your host, Angus Pyke.
Martin Harvey, how the heck are you?
I'm just fine and dandy. How about you, Angus Pyke?
I'm good. You know something serious is about to happen when we start using full names. So
I feel like I've been warming up for this for ages.
We have been. Well, it's a bit kind of awkward to know how to start it, given that this is our first collab that we're doing here, featured across both podcasts. You know, my natural dominant alpha personality just,
Yeah, well, I'm always submissive. I'm just rolling on my back for you to tickle my tummy at this point. So,
yeah, I know, kind of. Well, what we're doing today is we have a little book club group that we normally do with our dear friend Tony Croak as well, but we got a bit out of sync with one of the books that we're reading, and we thought that this might be a fun conversation for us to record because it's particularly pertinent to chiropractors and their communication as well. The book is called Made to Stick. This is me making it concrete, which we'll talk about in a moment there as well. Written by Chip Heath and Dan Heath, the brothers Heath. So normally when we do this to get our audience kind of up to speed is that we read the book in advance and then we just get together and discuss it. So that's what we're going to do today. And if it's valuable, we might record the future ones as well. Anything that you want to kind of talk about to kind of bring some context to this before we get started?
So I guess there's a couple of sort of big picture lessons that I sort of took out of this before we get into what did we sort of get out of individual sort of aspects of it.
Yes.
I read this book quite a while ago, and rereading it, it was almost as if I hadn't read it. Like I could see the descriptions that they have, and we'll come to some of this when we go into this sort of model of how you make an idea stick. But I think you proposed this book in book club, and I had come around to the idea of rereading books is sometimes valuable. You know, you get a couple of little bits and pieces along the way, but I was stunned with how much I'd missed applying in reading this book maybe 7 or 8 years ago. It was a really solid exercise for me to go through the second time. And I guess the lesson that I would encourage people to take is if there are those books that you found particularly influential, that sometimes it's better to read something that you know is going to have a whole lot of solid stuff in it rather than the latest thing that's the minimal publishable unit. I just find a lot of nonfiction books I'm talking about you, Simon Sinek. One good idea that could have been 6 or 7 pages,
yes,
padded out to make a 300-page book. This is referencing, there's a bit of inside chat where one of our previous book club books was that I nominated to the group was the Simon Sinek book, Leaders Eat Last. which makes me constantly want to punch Simon Sinek in the nose, because it was just excruciatingly low on content.
Yes, it was one of those books because, Start With Why, which is where his fame come from, his TED talk there too, was brilliant, great concepts.
Yeah.
And, we kind of discussed in there, it seemed to me to be an obvious follow-up from the publishers that said, let's get some books published quickly and out there. And, really, if you had have just read the cover, Leaders Eat Last, that's probably all you needed to know from it. It is a catchy title. Probably says it all there too. Although, interestingly, I have had a lot of people talk about his book, The Infinite Game, and it's come really. I'm so nervous about it though. I'm like,
I think,
yeah. Anyway, it's a good thought. This book kind of starts off, the subtitle of it, why some ideas survive and others die. It starts off with one of those kind of urban legend stories of, the guy's out at a bar, has a drink with a stranger, finds himself awake the next day in the bath with a note next to him saying, call 000, we've taken your kidneys, those kind of stories. And, the context of the book is that why do these stories survive and why do they perpetuate? How do they get so easily passed around? And this, particularly when I kind of think about the chiropractic story, our philosophy, our health view, it's not been all that sticky. We haven't done a great job of, certainly the community knows chiropractic, but in terms of vitalistic chiropractic and even relating chiropractic to the nerve system, anything beyond just the spine, we've not done a great job of making that sticky. So that was the context of where we go from there. They have, I guess, a kind of 5-part, 6-part.
Yes.
Counting.
It's very sticky. Yeah. No, it is sticky though, because it spells success.
Yes.
Which you have to slightly misspell to get there, but that's fine.
Well, let's give an overview just quickly of what that is, and then we can go into each of those and what we learned from it, my take homes, your take home. So those 5 points to make a message sticky, 6 points to make those message sticky. You want to give us an overview?
So essentially it's the first S stands for simple, that we need for things to be sticky. You can't have a really complex thing. You need something. And I think we can come back and maybe go into what we took from that. And there's a little bit more to just simple. There's ways of making things simple. U is for unexpected, that when things surprise us, we're more likely to pay attention to them. The first C is concrete, as opposed to abstract. And there's a couple of points that I want to make with that I think are super, super important. And when I was talking about rereading and coming back to it, there were a lot of points in that area that I thought, hang on, that's a distinction that I perhaps didn't emphasize as much as I could have. The second C stands for credible, in that we're much more likely to pay attention and take on board ideas when they're attached to somebody who we'd expect to have credibility in an area. Emotional, that taps into that idea of from the influence literature more broadly, that we make decisions based on emotion and then post hoc you look for rational, logical reasons to support the decision we've already made at a sort of emotional gut level. And the last part was stories. The S, the single S rather than double S, is for stories. That the way that our brains are wired, stories have a mechanism of really making us both pay attention and also then give us a structure to pass on a message to other people. So they are sort of the definition of putting a lot of those other pieces into one sort of strategy.
Love it. So let's dive deeper into each of those points, and we can perhaps give an explanation, and then, I've got some take homes for what I think in many of them, what you can start doing in practice tomorrow to make your messages more sticky as well. The simple one to me, I've some notes here that says, that quote I've taken out is, when you say 3 things, you say nothing. And, we're trying to get a lot of messages across with chiropractic often. or any natural health care listen to this. We're trying to share a lot of different things about health comes from here, and this is what your nerve system does, and pain means this and it doesn't mean that. There are a lot of different messages that we're kind of giving out there too. And in essence, the question I would ask our listeners here is, what's the simple idea that your practice stands for? Can you, they talk about the examples of the low cost airline. Was it Delta?
No, Southwest.
Southwest. That's, and they used that low cost airline really as a North Star to guide them in all of their decisions. It helped them know what to add in, what to remove. All of those kind of things there were all driven by this kind of simple message as well. This then starts to bring in, and it's a theme that kind of runs through the book, of the Cursive Knowledge. In that it seemed to be so thick in this, in that we've had 5 years of university training, some longer depending on where you are in the world, that we can talk about a sympathetic nerve system and brain stems and vagal tone. And, we can talk about vertebra and misalignment and subluxation, all those kind of things, because there's such a depth of background knowledge there that paints pictures and meaning inside of our minds. Even, we'll talk about it with the concrete in a moment, that when I say to another chiropractor that you'll be healthier, there's a knowledge there that we relate health to performance across every level. It means I'll be a better dad, all those kind of things there too. That background just isn't there with our audience. And so as a result of that, we lose them kind of immediately as well. I was thinking about, simple messages. Could it be just as simple as, a healthy spine, a healthy you? Now, we'll talk about health in terms of it, not as it being abstract, but, healthy spine, healthy life. The challenge I often, when I'm talking to chiropractors about these kind of things, is that we have such a big vision for stuff, and we want to talk about optimal, all that kind of stuff like that as well. So what do you want to add to that?
So I agree. So the cursive knowledge is a really important thing, because at the core of it is we not only have the knowledge, we can't retrospectively go back and really imagine, or it's difficult to go back and imagine what it would be like not to have this knowledge that we have, which is essentially what you have to create this message to some degree. And so in terms then of the way that you create a simple message, he talks a lot about the idea of the core of it, which is essentially what you were talking about with Southwest, of just having one key thing, like a commander's intent was another idea that he threw in there. But then he was saying, the other thing that he was saying was that for us to have a simple message, it not only needed to have that core idea, but it needed to be compact. So I had a few ideas around how you could apply this. So one of the ideas that I thought was core early on is that idea of chiropractic being for pain prevention and performance. And so it sort of allows you to just have a very simple thing of meeting people where they're at and then bridging higher. But because it's alliterative, you've got the PPP I found that to be quite a sticky model for people, that allows them to see their current beliefs, but also a context for where they could go. The other idea, he spoke a lot about simple ideas. Often the proverb is an example of a simple idea, because that's that idea of having the core, but having it embedded in there very compactly. And I looked at, the pivot point of what chiropractic beliefs, or what we're trying to encourage in terms of behavior that aligns with a belief in the people we're serving, is this idea of proactivity, that rather than just dealing with your health reactively, whether it's before we unpack that detail of this is how frequently you should come and this is what we need to do to restore things, that really the core of the idea is that it pays to deal with things before you sort of need to. And I found a really sticky idea of you only get one body. And then it's sort of, to me, has that almost proverb thing where it gets people thinking much more broadly beyond that. Like, well, if I got two bodies, what is that? I could drive it like I hired it. Whereas if I've only got one, I've got to sort of deal with it with a degree of reverence and care and concern. So I sort of look at that as another example maybe there. And I guess the last thing in terms of simple that I think is super applicable and allows us, so we'll get into it in the concrete part, I guess, but the other thing that comes with the cursive knowledge is that we tend to talk about things in highly abstract ways rather than concrete ways. So, the ultimate idea of abstraction is we'll talk about universal intelligence and innate intelligence, which are by definition abstractions. And we'll also then talk about we'll talk to people in words about subluxation and nerve interference and loss of health potential, which are all abstract concepts. They have if you don't have that existing knowledge, it's very difficult to translate. And so the idea of schema, where you take a complex idea that people already have an understanding of and then use it in a new metaphorical way to sort of translate into something that they may not have awareness of. Jesus, I butchered that. The irony of making something simple that I've just turned into a really
the irony of not
complex
having
thing.
a good schema for a schema.
Schema, yes. So the example that they give, which is the one that I tend to talk about when I teach schema in communication workshops, is the idea of, if I was to explain to you, I want to communicate a fruit that you haven't had before. And I want to say, look, if you imagine it, it's about 8 centimeters in diameter. For those of you who haven't caught up with the superiority of the metric system, it's approximately 3 inches in diameter. It has a pink to sometimes yellowy green hue. It's quite fragrant. It has a thick pith on the outside. It's a segmented fruit. You kind of have one sense of what pomelo is, but if I said it's sort of like an oversized grapefruit, you'd kind of go, all right, I've got a much more accurate sense of what it is because I haven't used all these abstract descriptors. I've just used something that you already know what it is and recontextualized it. So I think schema. So I'm sort of curious, did you have anything schema-wise that you came to, or do you want me to schema you up?
No. I'm happy to hear some more of your schemas through that too. But, I've always been a big fan of, I guess too, linking the unknown to the known. And one of the things I wanted to investigate a little bit more in terms of, I often kind of think of those as metaphors, and I don't know what the difference really is between a schema and a metaphor. I'm sure there is something.
I would just say that a schema is a version of a metaphor.
Yes.
Or actually, it's probably more correctly, I'm going to show my grammar nerd here, more correctly a simile.
Right.
Isn't a metaphor something that you say it is a grapefruit, whereas a simile is it's like an oversized grapefruit.
Yes.
Scoring points here.
Look, you had me at schema. So I think that take home message, really from this, for me is, there's that tendency for us to want to think that our patients are smarter than everybody else's and that they'll get this. And for me, to some extent, it was also, sometimes I felt like I was being a little condescending. And one of the things, I'm not sure if it was in this section through here, because we know that really what we're not dealing with nerves being pinched and bones on nerves, those kind of things there too. But when we're in primary school and they're teaching us the very basics of physics, and we talk about kind of atoms and things like that too, we also get a description of those that's not actually correct with regards to what quantum physics, but they're a model that helps us along the journey as we move forwards. And it does describe enough of what happens practically. And so I've kind of come around to, I can see some reason why I might want to go back to nerves being pinched as part of a description of what's going on. It doesn't accurately describes, but it gives a 40,000 foot view that can help somebody on the journey. And for those people that want to go more into kind of, mechanoreception, proprioception, disafferentation, then there's a place for that too, should they get there.
Yeah, I guess I also think that sometimes schema open up opportunities for you to have something that's really quite even more accurate. So I would say, like, one of the schema that I think is really useful is the idea of the role of the nervous system as carrying information. So so the nerve interference is a bit like if you and I were having a conversation on our mobiles or our cell phones for our Northern Hemisphere listeners, and the call was dropping in and out. So if I was giving you instructions of how to get where you needed to go and it was dropping in and out, you'd probably have a sense of it, but it's certainly not an accurate, and you're not going to be as efficient at getting there. So when you have these areas of subluxation, they're essentially interfering with that conversation between your brain and your body and your body and your brain. And so to me, that schema allows you to sort of get perhaps even a level of a model that's further along to the truth of disafferentation, or a more consistent model in a really quick way that's not super abstract. It's relatively imaginable for people. And one of the other things that I kind of like to do is, and we'll come into it in a little while, is experience. So if I was explaining that to somebody, I would say something like, you could have them have an experience where you'd say, look, Angus, just for a minute, shut your eyes and with your right first finger, just touch the tip of your nose. And so what essentially you had to do that was your brain had to be able to accurately hear the signals coming from all the little joint receptors along your finger and your arm to be able to position you with this, sixth sense of the communication of awareness of where your body is. If that's interfered with, your body's not going to be able to control itself as well. And that's certainly the case when the spine is interfered with, it doesn't control itself as well. And you can sort of start to give them experiences, and certainly balance as a test is quite a concrete experience of nerve interference. So anyway, I'm sort of jumping ahead a little bit, but I think schema are really, really useful. The other schema that I would probably throw into there that I think can be super useful. So one of the challenges I think we have in chiropractic is the fact that it just takes time to change soft tissues. And so if we're going beyond pain relief, we've got a culture that's expecting quick results. Most medical things, you should feel better in a day or two.
Yes.
Whereas we're asking people to adopt an idea of longer, slower process.
Yes.
And so I think the metaphor of soft tissue healing timeframes can be really useful. So, you have people where you would say, look, I'm not sure whether you follow the football at all, but if you were to have a ligament issue that needed to heal, how long, like somebody did an ACL, how long? Now, that may be only in football focused cultures like Melbourne, but my sense is, having trained thousands of chiropractors in this, it's pretty universal. Even people who aren't into that know enough that, oh, look, you do an ACL, that's a year.
Yes.
So it's a very quick schema to then say, well, look, you haven't torn the ligaments in your spine, but they've likely to have kind of shrunk wrap, which is another metaphor around the abnormal pattern of the way your spine's worked. So if we really want to make that sort of fundamental change, it's probably going to take the better part of a year. So really easy schema to get this concept of why things are going to take a certain time. And then we can extend beyond that, which might be beyond the scope of today, but talking about muscle healing timeframes, which sort of correlate with the time that most people need that sort of intensive phase of care initially. And those schemas allow people to go quite quickly from that idea of it should be feeling better in a day or two to I should be noticing some improvements over X number of weeks. And if I really want to make a fundamental change, that could be the better part of a year.
Yeah. So in essence, what we're wanting to do is take an area that's unknown and complex and compare it to an area that's known and that there's already a level of understanding about.
Absolutely.
Where we can kind of say this unknown thing is like this known thing, and build a bridge between the two of them. Is rather than us actually getting into what happens on a mitochondrial level when when ligaments need to kind of heal from there as well.
Absolutely.
Unexpected.
Yes. So unexpected in a way, I think, is the extension of what you're saying, where you're saying you've got to go from the known to the unknown. This is almost like highlight what is unknown, and that's an uncomfortable feeling that people will seek to resolve. So the way I think of it is our brains are sort of problem-solving machines, and it feels bad to have an unclosed loop. So not bad in a horrible sense, but the way I like to describe it is, say that feeling that it works best if you're talking to people who lived life before smartphones, at least for a little while, because it's sort of, you don't often get that, but that feeling of you're at dinner with friends and you're talking about movies and you go, oh, what was that movie that had John Travolta and Nicolas Cage in it, and they did and you sort of this feeling of, oh God, I can't remember what the actual movie, what was it called?
Yes.
And that's essentially what the part of what the unexpected is. So you can surprise people with unexpected, or you can use what I'm describing, which is a knowledge gap. Where you're giving people a bit of they're giving a sense of, I don't know what that piece of information is.
For a long time, and often, certainly in the early years, as when I was in chiropractic, I would often tell the Harvey Lillard story. And it's interesting because it was always a very engaging story. So one, it's a story, and we'll talk about stories a little bit later on, but it has that massive unexpected thing in it too. Like he was deaf and had an adjustment, and then he could hear again. That's not, when you're telling somebody about how chiropractic started, that's not the story that most people are expecting you to tell. No. And for that reason, it was a great story and an impactful story for me to start and then build a bridge onto other things. That's what, really had me, it shone a light on that too. I was kind of wondering even, are there other things that we could share, and how do we make them into stories per se, as opposed to, one of the things that I would often say to people, when they would come to me that might have an MRI or a CT that might show that they have a disc bulge on it, but they're relatively asymptomatic. And I would often tell a story. Look, when we first got this technology, we thought that we'd found the cause for all back pain. We'd found these disc bulge things there too, and when at last we found the cause of them, until finally one clever person came along one day and did a whole bunch of these MRIs and CTs on people who'd never had back pain, and realized that a large number of them had these disc bulges as well. And in actual fact, instead of me saying, well, Jones and Smith from Spine in 2017 did this, I would always tell it like a story. And it made me wonder that, we're often saying, if we're talking about ear infections and kids and antibiotics, we might be tempted in one way to say, well, the research shows this, and obviously research brings credibility. But you could say that in the same way, particularly if we knew the name of the person to add in there too. Well, there was an interesting guy over in, the UK, and Jones was his name there. He was fascinated on why some kids continue, to make that into a story as well. It's got me thinking about all of those kind of things there too, that could have that unexpected element to it, story to it, also a level of concreteness as well. So what did you come up with unexpected?
Yeah, so there's a couple of other things that I think, so unexpected, I think, is actually a really important area. So I often talk about the hierarchy of influence, which is, if we want an idea to stick in the context of what we're talking today, so that it will change people's beliefs and therefore their behavior, just telling people stuff, like telling people the research says X, doesn't work so well, because first of all, it's blocked and filtered. If it doesn't align with their existing beliefs, they kind of reject it, a whole bunch of things. So if we fast forward to the hierarchy of influence, the most impactful thing that people will change their beliefs and therefore their behavior of things that they experience The next two levels are where, so they're almost as impactful as that, but not quite, are where people think something and say it out loud, or just think something. And so we kind of want to, if we need to tell people information, say those scenarios that you were describing then, let's say it is regarding the potential role that chiropractic could have in regard to ear infections, rather than telling them, look, you should bring your child in because we might be able to help them with their ear infections. If that doesn't align with their existing beliefs, it's kind of, you're just trying to build your practice. There's that potential interpretation. You can tell a story as one way of creating interest and unexpectedness, etc. Another way that you could use is just to create a knowledge gap. And a knowledge gap is actually a super easy, quick way of doing it, which is, I'm curious, Angus, have I ever told you about the role of the spine with ear infections?
No.
Okay, so as soon as I do that, I've created a little knowledge gap with you. I've created the equivalent of what was that movie that Nicolas Cage and John Travolta were in. It's not particularly difficult, but anytime you need to tell somebody something, creating a knowledge gap is actually a really useful way. And even if it's as direct as, have I ever told you, or did I ever tell you? So another example, say one of the most common communication dilemmas that chiropractors will have is where somebody who is trained in this culture to expect really quick results, you've done your report of findings and explained the timeframes that we're talking, and you've used a schema and they understood it at the time, but then they've gone back out into the world and that idea hasn't quite stuck. So I want to re-stick that idea because I know that schema works really well once they've got that schema in their head. So if they're coming in 3 weeks in and going, look, I don't know whether this is working because I'm not feeling that much better yet, you can create a knowledge gap before you say, look, I told you in your report that it was going to take 6 weeks. So rather than making them wrong for bringing it up, which we know is a way of just embedding their existing beliefs, I could say, did I tell you about soft tissue healing times, Angus? I'm not sure. Did I go over that with you back at the start?
Yeah, vaguely remember that.
Yeah, or they go. So there's a couple of different responses. They either go, "Oh, yeah, that's right. It's going to take some time," or they'll say, "Oh, vaguely." In which case, you just need to go back again and reinstall that schema. Or they'll go, "Yeah, I don't think you did," which, even if you know you did, you don't want to debate whether you did or you didn't. You go, oh, okay, I apologize. What the idea there is, and you just map out what a soft tissue healing time frame is and the relevance for where they're at. But by first creating that knowledge gap, it means that rather than you being blocked and filtered, it takes it up to that next level where they're looking to resolve it. The puzzle solving machine of their brain is looking to sort of find that out.
And I can see from that, by asking that question, have I ever told you about, when they say no, you haven't or not, it's them actually giving you permission to tell them about it.
Exactly.
And so given that there's a permission there, is less likely to be any kind of bias, cognitive bias against it too, that you're not trying to tell me something. I've asked you to tell me that too. I can see, how clever that is. And I like that. That's a winner there too. So that's that knowledge gap from that way also.
So the other thing with that I think that you touched on, which is super important, is that by creating permission, particularly if it's those sort of slightly tense moments, those difficult situations where you either have explicit permission or implicit permission, like you have in that scenario.
Yes.
The other person doesn't, even if you're disagreeing with their conclusion in a way, you don't perceive it as being a disagreement if you've given permission, because essentially the way that it looks is, well, I sort of said I asked for this, therefore, and it also communicates sensitivity to their beliefs that you've paused enough to ask for permission rather than rolling over the top of them with your presumption of a higher level of knowledge.
Yeah. Love it. So, unexpected, create that knowledge gap. how can we, in essence, from there too, mystery is one of those things that's unexpected. So we move from there into concrete. This was another one here when I was reading this section where I just saw so many of the mistakes that I have, just things I haven't done well, previously. We touched on them beforehand. Again, we go back into, some of the cursive knowledge, the communication
abstraction.
Yes. Yeah. Abstraction very much through there too. Better health, better immunity, better energy, these kind of things there as well. They're not concrete to most people. And
I kept thinking of the very early stages before I sort of got into influence literature stuff, where I would talk to people about, so chiropractic is not about pain. It's really about you optimizing your human potential. And you go, oh my God.
So the one thing that was concrete that they possibly could have bought a hold of, pain.
It's not that.
It's not that.
You're in the if you're here for pain, you're in the wrong place. I'm here for this abstract philosophical concept that you've never heard about, and I haven't given you any model that you might be able to attach to. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, again here, I think back to some of this, because when we talk about kind of, how do we take a message from abstract into concrete? What are your thoughts? Because that's really what we want to do here.
Yeah. So I sort of think there's a lot to this. And so I don't want to, spool out too much, but I think sometimes if you give a really concrete example, it's going to be more concrete. So one of the things that I will typically train chiropractors very, very early on in is, if we want people to understand what we're doing, that there's this thing called a subluxation, that it impacts the way your body works, that you can't necessarily feel whether it's there or not, and that you want to have them having almost like a testable credential that it's changed. You've got to make the testing, rather than this doctorly thing that you do, you've got to make it an experience.
Yes.
Because the test, there's often, and again, it's this cursive knowledge, we get somebody in as a new client, or if we're doing a re-exam, or even the way that we're testing people a visit to visit doing our analysis, we are turning it into abstract stuff like, okay, there's a subluxation here, there's a change in tone. I know that this is a source of disafferentation, and that can have these global effects on the way their whole body works. All of that I know as an abstract concept, and I've got that whole framework, so that we then communicate, there's a subluxation here, and that, can affect your total the way your whole body works, but there's no concrete link there. So I think the first step that people need to make is to sort of pre-frame from concrete, like an example with a spine. This is a spine that's not moving properly. That's what I'm looking for. These areas often will feel tender when I touch them, which is very concrete. They'll often affect the way you bend and move when we measure your range of motion. Because they impact your nervous system, they'll affect your balance. Because they affect the way your whole spinal system works, they'll often affect your posture. And so going into those things, they're understanding that these are all indications. And then as an example, say if we were doing range of motion testing, if somebody came to see me with symptoms of their lower back, I think it's a really important experience to measure their lower back range of motion and measure their neck range of motion, so that you can say, look, what should happen is you should be able to tilt your head to the left and then tilt to the right, and it should be able to go the same amount each way if all the vertebrae are doing their job. Let's have a look and see how you're going. And then you just measure it and go, all right, it's 44 degrees to the right, to the left. Let's see how you're going to the right. Oh, what do you notice there? And by making, and it seems so, to us, because of the cursive knowledge, seems so absurdly simple. But for people who think that they can tell how their body's working by how they feel, whether they have pain or not, it's almost like a what the hell happened there experience. And similarly, doing balance testing, as this is the window where we can see how well your brain and body are communicating to each other. and then saying, look, what you should be able to do is, and I'll use a modified for kudas, you should be able to stay on that same spot while you do this balance testing, and then get them to do the test and go, what do you notice? That's a much more sort of concrete way of giving them an experience of those ideas that we like to communicate.
In one of the marketing tenets and communication tenets is never tell when you can show. Which is a big part of this. It's one thing to tell somebody that your posture's out of whack. It's another thing to get them in front of the mirror. And, when I check somebody's posture there too, before I will say your left shoulder's higher than the right, I will say, Martin, have a look at your shoulders. What do you notice? And get them to say it back to me. And then let's look at the gap in between the arms. What can you see left and right? And sometimes I will need to support them in that journey. But whenever we can, let somebody experience what's going on. A friend of ours, Tony Rose, was recently getting adjusted by another friend of his who does some really, I'll call it wacky kind of, chiropractic, quantum neurology work. Okay, lasers in the eyes and wild stuff there too. But Tony said what was interesting about it is Ben beforehand might get a pinwheel, for instance, and kind of tickle it on his neck left and right. And Tony would go, oh, I really can't feel it on the right side there. And then Ben would just do his lasers in the eyes, which felt like nothing to Tony. He's like, what the heck are you doing here? But then he'd run the pinwheel down again and then they would be even. Yeah. And Tony talked about how powerful an experience that was for him to go, okay, that just made this thing that you did concrete. I've experienced the changes. I'm not aware of what it's done to my brain, but I'm then relating this kind of thing on my neck now as well. So I wonder.
That sort of taps into the next C as well, in that one of the core ideas there was essentially giving people testable credentials. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go back.
No. But I think where possible, because the very nature of a lot of what we're doing is abstract, when we are talking about, performance that you talked about to begin with, from, pain to prevention to performance, there are elements of it that are difficult to quantify in the bigness, but we can bring them back to posture and, range of motion, pain to something. And then we can use schemas to link that to bigger things back and forwards. They all kind of link together as well, but giving somebody a concrete example of it too. I also, I liked the example in there as well. One of the things that I will talk about is the importance of an avatar. Who is it that you want to see in your practice? You and I were talking last week about the, 1,000 True Fans. Was the guy from Wired that did it? Can you remember what his name was?
Kevin Kelly, I think it was.
Yes. Yeah. So he said really what any business can do very well if they find 1,000 true fans. And if you imagine if you had 1,000 patients that just were totally into what you did, that's a really substantial practice that you've got going there. But part of finding that person is getting really concrete about who they are. And they gave the example there of Saddleback Church, one of those mega churches over in the States, 50,000 kind of members. And they had Saddleback Sam and Saddleback Samantha, where they were really clear about who they were, what they liked, what they disliked. And that concrete vision of who that was helped them make a lot of decisions in there too. And we lose that, whenever we're talking, or I'm talking to people about niche, who do you like to look after? Well, I look after everyone. Well, if you look after everybody, it's hard to get concrete about what would they want, what do they don't want, what hours they work, all those kind of things there too. So I was interested in that concrete and the importance of being concrete from that point of view also. Yeah,
that's a good distinction really, because there is, I think Seth Godin talks about when you do his work and in This Is Marketing, he gets people to do an exercise in I think he calls it Edgecraft, where essentially you look at any two parameters that people might be looking for in a domain, and you map out on the almost like a graph in terms of a quadrant, one of those quadrant graphs, whether somebody is really, really strong in an area or really, really weak in an area. And so often, but he said often what we tend to do is try not to offend anybody, which pushes everybody into being the same. Whereas there's uniqueness and being really sort of overly strong in an area, really standing for something will alienate people, and it will evoke those true fans, like the people who are really, really into whatever that is will be much more likely to be attracted to it. So you can't really be attractive unless you're prepared to be repulsive to some people.
I think that's, and I communicate that all the time. And I'm also interested in this because sometimes what I used to hear when I was reading that and talking about that too, is that I had to go out of my way and almost offend the people that, and again, it's well overused, but Apple is such a great example of, you've got your Apple people and then you've got your PC people. And it's not, whilst Apple did have their kind of, PC guy, Apple guy there too, they have this stance of here's what we're about, but they're not openly, out the front, they're mocking people walking past with their Samsung phones. So just because, when you take this stance about who you're for, you're concrete on this person there too, it doesn't mean that you're offensive to the other group. I'm not suggesting that for one moment. And that when I had that distinction, it was like, oh, good, I can do this. We might have, and God bless him, love this guy. We think about Billy DeMoss, for instance. He's somebody that's taken a real stand, and you either love Billy or there's not many people sitting in the middle with where Billy's gone. And that's effective in one way, and that's a strategy, although I don't think that has to be, that's clearly not the strategy that Apple has done, for instance.
No, I think that, and so I think there's degrees of that, but certainly being explicit about what you're, and to me, there's a choice of being explicit about what you're for.
Yes.
And then there's the choice of whether you make part of what you're for is that you're against something else. And I think that to me is the distinction, that I don't find that as attractive as people who are for what they're for.
Yeah, that's the old Mother Teresa thing, isn't it? She goes, look, I'm not going to go along to an anti-war rally, but when you have a pro-peace rally, I will go along to that. Here's what I'm taking a stand for. And I think there's a really lovely, in this current climate at the moment, I've found a nice place of saying, look, what our governments and traditional healthcare is doing is a very defensive strategy. Okay, it's very defense, all that kind of stuff. And God bless them, because to win at any game, you need to have good defense, but I'm all for offense. What can we do from an offense strategy to make sure host resistance is up and all those kind of other things there too? Here's what I'm a stand for. So,
that's good.
Shall we move on to credible?
Like the schema.
Yeah. Yes,
okay.
exactly.
I think credible to me crosses over quite a bit in terms of there are a bunch of different external sources of credibility. And we spoke earlier about, science is the currency of credibility. We can lean into some of those ideas. I think to a large degree, that type of credibility is useful, but not probably as direct as the idea. The idea that I really want to shine the spotlight on in terms of credibility is that idea of there being essentially testable credentials. So if we sort of have that core idea that, life goes better with chiropractic, how your body works affects everything you do, and that's most valuable, the things that you have to do, love to do, see as your role or identity, those sort of abstract ideas, giving people an opportunity or a framework where they test that, and ideally early on in care, gives it sort of credibility because they've experienced it, which is the highest level of that influence literature. So in my sort of approach to communication within the practice, I encourage chiropractors to, as early as possible, pre-frame their experience, either verbally or by using surveys that ask questions beyond what they're experiencing. So, as an example of a survey, if you get somebody on their second visit, when you're talking about this abstract idea of this will help, as well as having a pain and prevention, a lot of people notice that as their body works better, as their spine works better, their whole body works better. I'm going to have you do today a survey that gets you to self-rate a lot of the areas that people commonly notice improvement in as their spine improves. So it's concentration, mood, sleep, et cetera, et cetera. But then what it does, so to me, if we don't do that early, people will experience changes, but they don't have any context of why they're happening. Oh, I'm probably sleeping better than I have before. Oh, that's lucky. Whereas if we pre-framed it, we've created a testable credential, and then they come back to it and I go, look at this, you rated your sleep as a 3 and now it's a 6. What do you reckon that's about? And the fact that we've already pre-framed that gives them a testable credential. In terms of that lifestyle stuff, I teach us an approach called lifestyle linking, which is, say, if I know you're into golf, a few weeks into care, I'll say to you, hey, Angus, do you remember us talking about that sort of performance side of chiropractic?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yes or no, or whatever it is. I'm trying to create a knowledge gap so that you have some interest in. And then I'll say, look, what I'd like for you to do, a lot of people like you who are golfers notice that as their spine improves, as they're starting to get better quality communication between their brain and their body, that has an impact on their golf. Now, it varies for everybody. Some people notice that their swing is smoother. Some people even notice that their scores are a bit more consistently dropping, whatever. I'm sort of curious what that might be for you. So can I get you to track on that and just let me know what you notice when you're playing golf? And it might not be this week. It might be in 6 months. I don't know. But just that's what most people notice. I'd be curious. So there's a couple of things that are loaded into there. I'm doing the most people thing. So there's one of the core ideas within, say, Cialdini's perspective is that social proof, what other people do. So I'm sort of raising a language that's associated with that. I'm using a knowledge gap, but really critically in terms of our discussion now, we're giving you a testable credential. If this idea that the core idea that I think people need to get to use chiropractic the way chiropractors use chiropractic is the understanding that how your body works, the better it works, the better able you are to do the things that you have to do, the things that you love to do, or the things that you see as your role or identity to do. So if I want you to come to that idea, if I give you a testable credential of an experience, once you have that experience, it's undeniable that that has happened. And,
I'm with you with that too. And I think sometimes, and I've gone through phases of this, that the standard go-to for most of us for credibility is research. And it is part of the language that community wants. My retort back to people with this, when they say this is all that we need, would be, what proportion of the public do you think that know that exercise is good for them? And the numbers would be close to 100%. And then if we said that scientifically, absolutely no, it's the research to prove it. Go, 100%. And then what percentage of people are actually exercising every day? It's low. So just because I put a paper in front of them that says, if it existed, that chiropractic helps you experience everything, nothing short of, the Holy Ghost along the way there too, that paper enough is not going to change their behavior. The idea of having them experience it firsthand, I think is where to go. I liked the idea of the anti-authority as well. And I was thinking about, the anti-authority would be in the smoking ads when they have somebody that's on their deathbed, saying, look, I smoked my whole life. I wish I hadn't. They're not a celebrity. It's not an expert in terms of it's somebody that's, and I wondered too that if you're in a part of the world where somebody, you're able to use testimonials, you could get elements of that, of, sticking with the ear infections, a parent who was talking about their child who had the side effects of the antibiotics, had the side effects of maybe the tubes and the surgery, those kind of things, then perhaps found you, that has elements of that anti-authority in some extent there is also. So, and then as I mentioned too, we've got the celebrity I see across Instagram all the time. It seems that whenever some celebrity does, or sporting person does something great, they have had a chiropractic adjustment there, and we take all... that's the reason that Tom Brady is still, doing what he's doing at, 107 years of age is his chiropractic adjustment. I know it helps, but, these are things, experts, celebrities, anti-authorities, they're too. But I really, I've been going kind of all in on the idea of how can I have people experience this for themselves. So testable. Yeah, good thoughts, dude.
Yeah.
Shall we move to emotional?
Absolutely. Do you want to go first? I feel like I've...
Well, no, it's good. I've got notes here that, because in essence, for people to take action, they need to care. That's kind of, and getting people emotionally connected is what makes them care. So, there are lots of different ways about this too. They talk about appealing to self-interest.
Yeah.
And this is really about communicating to them what's in it for them.
Yeah.
That thing there is also. So,
before you go on beyond that, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and this is one of those points that I don't know that I necessarily took out of it the first time I read this, was the idea of getting out of Maslow's basement.
Yes.
So sometimes that, and it's a common thing across the influence literature, it's a common thing across marketing to say, don't get all frilly and whatever, just go to what's in it for them, which then tends to drive people to this idea that that everybody's just completely self-motivated and self-interested, and the only thing that's going to appeal to people is if they can save money and if they can do better, and essentially appealing to those base of Maslow's hierarchy, the sort of survival and this idea that we're sort of clawing for everything that we can get, which I thought it was interesting where they were quoting research that was saying that when they were looking at different appeals, asking people to rate whether something would appeal to them to donate to a charity, they rated other people's likelihood to donate as much higher if it was very base, do this and you'll get a tax deduction and you'll get this free tote bag and you'll get, what do you get out of it?
Yes.
But they felt that they would be much more likely if it was much more about self-actualization and making a difference in the world. Look, I don't really need another tote bag. I don't need any of that. I just really want to feel like I've made a difference. And I think to me that the difference there is sometimes in chiropractic, we get stuck in Maslow's basement of the only way that people will pay any attention to chiropractic is if we talk about pain, where I think you need to be relevant to pain. And I think you can pretty quickly, for a lot of people, particularly using that idea of bridging, go pain, prevention, performance. And for a lot of people, that's a really, I want my life to mean something. I want my life to be about these things that I love doing and the people that I love doing it with and the identity that I have. That's much more attractive to me as something that I want to invest time, money, and energy into. And particularly if we need the 1,000 true fans, I think making that available is a pretty fast track to getting the 1,000 true fans of people who are, I'm really about living a life out loud.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the first time, because typically Maslow's hierarchy has been communicated as a bridge or as a series of steps that, you can't worry about self-actualization while you're hungry. We need to get these. And what they pointed to in there is, like so many things in life, it's not an either or, it's a both and that you can be hungry. They talk about the starving artist, for instance. You can be both of those things at the same time. And so again, being able to identify, and this is where I get, my thoughts are, what is it in for you? And I think we can have conversations with people that start to, investigate what is important for them. Where are they spending their time, their energy? As you've mentioned to us on previous episodes there too, and with the training of what do they talk about all the time? Where do you spend your time? What are you doing? What do you talk about? These are good ideas of perhaps what their focus is with regards to kind of Maslow's hierarchy as well. So,
So I think to me, one of the ideas that they spoke about with emotion was that idea of linking to things that they care about. And kind of the core, I'll often have chiropractors come and observe me in practice. And if they haven't done a lot of my training beforehand, I almost feel like you're kind of missing what this is about. Because if you just came in and you didn't know the framework, you would assume I was just talking idle bullshit with people, because my whole role of the goal for me is really simple. I want to help people realize that having their body work better helps them be better at the things that they have to do, love to do, and see as their role or identity to do. And so part of the way that you link back to, you make chiropractic part of golf is every time you come in, and you're not just about golf, but I would, like, if you're coming in, I'd be saying, how's Lauren? When's the baby coming? How's the family? How's the podcast? You know, I would be making chiropractic by implication part of those things. And there would be some schema and some testing the credentials and those sort of things. But everybody that I'm having a chat to about, I'm just having a chat about the stuff that's important to them for a lot of the time. And there's a process that you then regularly relink that back. So it's no longer just chit chat, but you've got to make that link.
That needs to be kind of really double tapped on. You know, one of my favorite kind of sayings to throw out there is that when all else is even, we do business with people that we like. You know, down here in Bowen Heads, where we are now, there are 2 cafes that we're going between. One of them, the coffee and food is superior, but the staff just always seem grumpy. It's hard to get a smile out of them. You know, they're all, you know, there's just this feeling. Now, it could be a reflection of Lauren and me, probably a reflection of me. They're just not wanting to serve me. And then there's another place around the corner there where it's not that the coffee and food is bad, but it's not as good as the first place. But the staff are wonderful. Like, there's just beaming smiles. The people are likable. And because of that, you know, we spend 70% of our time at that place. Now, so this is, you know, we have an emotional connection to the other place, even though that its product is not as good as the first one there. And so that's why I just, you know, don't underplay the importance of, when somebody's coming in for an adjustment, of being likable. And, you know, part of being likable is that we like things like us. You know, we're egotistical and around there. I like talking about the things that I'm interested in. And if you're able to pick up on, you know, Lauren and golf and the podcast and those kind of things there too, then that in terms is going to, and it's a huge thing that, you know, out of all of this, if that's just one of the points that you take home, then you will see retention, you know, you will see follow through, all those kind of things, you know, skyrocket.
And I think that in the pretty radical change that's happened over the last year and a half, where an increasing proportion of our patients, clients, practice members are working remotely, that opportunity for just being seen for who you are, like the things that really make you who you are, and getting to talk about them with somebody who's actively interested, that's pretty rich emotional juice for this large portion of people who, and I know it's different in different parts of the world, but I think there's a tendency, whether you're no longer in lockdown land, there are still some fundamental changes there where a significant number of people are not going back to how things were before. So there's this, in an increasingly disconnected world, that opportunity for connection and the emotion that goes with just being seen as a multi-dimensional human is pretty powerful. Yeah.
It brings us back to your adversary, to Simon Sinek here. His book.
I actually quite like most of his stuff. It's just that one book.
I'm you know, in some kind of Logan Paul versus Mayweather fight, I'm wanting to recreate a Martin Harvey kind of Simon Sinek type sort of, I'm not sure if we'll get the same pay-per-view type sort of box office from it, but but his book, Start With Why, is really all about that emotional connection. That's where we begin with there too. And it was an interesting, you know, because this is where there is some overlap and also to some extent some contradiction in terms of, we want to make things concrete, as least abstract as possible, simple, yet we can delve into emotions. And, you know, so I kind of went through, one of the ways that we can find these whys is, you know, Toyota talks about the 5 whys, but asking a question why 3 times there too. Like, so we've got a chiropractic practice. Why? To remove stress from the spine and nerve system. So that's our first why. Well, why do you do that? Well, to help people have a healthier life. Well, why is that important? Well, because we believe that health is a foundation to every aspect of human expression.
Yeah.
Now, when we start, there's obviously a lot of abstracts in that, and I could kind of work a bit better, but we're starting to bring context to why we do what we do. It brings meaning to it as well. There's an emotional connection that starts to happen that doesn't happen from, a chiropractic practice as well. So, those things through there too. I will do a little bit more kind of deep work with those kind of whys. But I feel at some, to some point that when you get deeper in there, there possibly will be some abstracts to it, but there is context to it as well that, that I think is important.
I like it.
Yeah.
One other aspect of emotion that I thought was really interesting specifically for us in healthcare was the idea, and because we are trained clinically, we get sort of taught to do a history in quite an unemotional, analytical way. So Angus, tell me about the pain. Is it throbbing? Is it aching? Is it sharp pain?
Yes.
We get to do this sort of very abstract thing. Now, there's a whole lot of research in the psychology literature that says that part of what determines how people see their situation is determined by how their psychology in terms of where they sit on that continuum of copers versus catastrophizers.
Mm-hmm.
And so the metaphor there would be the difference between, when we're working with people, they have a different way in terms of how they deal with challenging situations or difficult situations. Copers the metaphor there is Germans versus Italians. And I know that's a cliche, but it's a cliche because there's an element of truth to it, where different cultures celebrate different ways of dealing with difficult situations in terms of how you manage your emotions. So catastrophizers tend to lean into the emotion. Oh my God, this is killing me. It feels like my back could break. I can't imagine, I've got to do this and I'm so worried. And because most of us live in cultures that celebrate the opposite, the coping end of it, we often find those people quite difficult. But intuitively, we tend to help give them a more balanced perspective by steering them towards, well, let's have a talk about what you can do. And, we get them to start to look at things from a more stoic perspective. The thing that really, I think and essentially if we look at that, they're leaning into emotion. People who are copers though, are much more of a challenge because the way they've coped with the development of a longer term health issue often is by disconnecting the emotion from the experience. So to give you a little bit of an example, you could have let's say a middle-aged guy who's been doing the classic thing of going from having a occasional sore back to kind of a chronically sore back. And you look at the path along that's happened there, it's been, oh, my back's sore and every time I play golf, it gets worse. But, I'm going to tell myself a story now that removes the emotion of not being able to play golf. Well, life's not really about games anyway. I've got more important things that I've got to focus on. So, go like that. And, then it stops you being able to stay as long at work. And well, look, work don't really appreciate me. And, at least I've got my family. And then you can't get down on the floor to play with the kids. Oh, well, they're kind of little shits anyway, and they got to learn to be a bit independent. And you can tell yourself this whole story, but essentially they're removing the emotion from the experience of this problem getting worse. And then we ask this highly analytical history, which doesn't help them reconnect with an accurate perspective of reconnecting the emotion with the experience. So I like to do those unpacking questions, which essentially get them to reconnect emotion with the experience. And the reason that I like to do that is that coper tends to see the size of the problem as much smaller because they're not. Yes. Whereas if we want them to see, oh yeah, it makes sense that I need a period of intensive care and it's going to take more than a couple of visits. Part of that is reconnecting with the emotion. And it's really simple. There's a whole series of the questions, which I'll just give you. The first couple are things like, so Angus, I'm sort of curious with your back pain, often for people it's about the pain, but it's often also about what the pain is either stopping you doing or making it harder for you to do that you need to do or you like to do. So what are the things with your back pain around that? And then exploring that more, like diving down that. So tell the more whys behind that. Why is not being able to play with the kids an issue? Well, because, you know, I sort of realized that they're at that age that they might not want to play with me in 5 years' time. Okay, so you can then unpack that.
Yes.
And the unpacking questions essentially allow them to reconnect the emotion with the experience, which helps them see, oh my God, this is actually important for me to do something with.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, getting into, you know, that the emotional experience of it there too. It's got it. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Beautifully said. Let's finish up with stories.
Yeah.
You know, the tagline with stories is that stories get people to act. You mentioned earlier on that when we are telling people things, how ineffective it is at getting people to change behavior. I think it's many times when we're told stuff, and you'll understand this better than I am, but we're looking inside, you're telling me something. I'm seeing how this fits with what my current beliefs are in the world. And if it happens to match my beliefs, then fantastic. But oftentimes what we're doing is sharing beliefs with people that don't match where they're at. So I've then got to some form of conundrum. Either I've been wrong or you're wrong. And as a general rule, if I've got a choice between making me wrong and you wrong, depending on how well you've done with all those other things of credibility and all that kind of stuff there too, I'm going to lean towards making you wrong. The interesting thing is about a story is that when I share a story, those filters certainly lower, if not disappear. I can experience it. So that's what I really got from here as well. So they bypass that tendency of, am I wrong? Are you wrong? You know, I can experience something and I'm more likely to take on a new belief system from the story than I am had you just told me.
Yeah.
Fair synopsis?
Yeah, I think that's, if I can sort of double click on one of the really most important things, we spoke earlier about the hierarchy of influence, that telling people is the lowest, that what they experience is the highest.
Yes.
When we tell people a story, it's an experience by proxy. So what I mean by that is when we listen to a story, we put ourselves in the place of the protagonist and go on that journey. So if I take as an example, if you ever, and I'm probably dating myself with this reference, but if you watched Pulp Fiction, then each of those scenes are like an individual story. And so you are Jules for the period when you're in the, you know, in the bedroom, you know, with the guys with they've taken the briefcase. So you essentially put yourself in the place of the protagonist. And so you have the experience. And so if we, looping back to the example that you were saying, whether it's a testimonial, whether it's a case study, which are probably the in between that you can use in places where there's where there's prohibitions on using testimonials, or there's just a story that you tell somebody, they put themselves in the place of the protagonist. So if we go back to that scenario, you were talking about a parent who's got a kid who's getting recurrent ear infections. Angus, would it be okay if I just shared a little story about somebody else who was in a similar situation as you were?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so you can use a very simple structure for this sort of story, which is feel, felt, found. So this is a story about the one that I typically tell is of a woman. So in this situation, I'm going to say there's a story of a woman called Amy. She had a little son called Lachlan, who, similar to your kid, was having issues with getting ear infections again and again and again. She'd given him antibiotics. He'd had tubes twice, and included once it seemed to work okay. The other time it didn't seem to make any difference at all. But when she went back, there wasn't anything new, and that was profit. They were essentially saying, look, you're just going to have to take antibiotics every time, and then we can keep doing the tubes if we need to, but they don't seem to be helping. And so she felt really quite, I guess, sort of hopeless, that she just had to wait for however long for this to resolve, that there was no real clear path behind in front of it. What I spoke to her about was that in some kids, what I found is that there is so that sometimes if their upper neck and related areas aren't moving or working quite the way that it should, that it can upset the way that drainage of the ears work, and that in some kids seems to make them more predisposed. Now, I'm using a whole lot. Part of what you can do to get credibility is understate things rather than overstate it. So
Yes.
I'm deliberately being less emphatic than you probably could be, because that actually creates credibility.
Yes.
So then I'm taking them on the journey. So what she felt when she was given the information from the GP was there was no path forward. And when we checked Lachlan, there was an area in his neck that was, I found, just so out of balance. And we worked with him over a period of, I think it was probably 2 or 3 weeks, worked quite intensively getting that area working better. What she found was that gradually, first, Lachlan came in one day and said, I can hear out of this ear. And then over a period of 6 months or so, didn't get another ear infection. So I guess I'm telling you that story to just give you potentially another way of maybe looking at your son's ear infections.
Yeah. Love it. Feel, felt, found.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason that's important is stories pack emotion. Now, if you structure a story around the details of your subluxation analysis and the dosage of the antibiotics and the details of what type of tympanic tube was used, it's not as compelling as this is how she felt. This is the feel, felt, found part of it.
But I think that too, because there are some specifics that matter in that. Amy's name, the little boy's name, you could put in there the number of times they had ear infection. So some specifics and details help in stories, and some detract from it as well. So, those kind of things that are more likely to emotionally connect us to the protagonist in the story there, I think are really important to include, to share how Amy felt, the frustration, what it meant to her. She was questioning, her ability to be able to I want to care for my child, all those kind of things, to kind of add them in there. But interesting in there too, because they kind of mentioned sometimes when I'm thinking about this, I'm like, I don't have a big, powerful Amy story or this. The interesting thing about stories is they don't necessarily have to be great stories. The moment that we get into the story side of things, it can be really effective. And, they gave a couple of examples in the book. I go, that wasn't a particularly inspiring story, but it really got the point across. To the point, I think I found it interesting that, they talked about a little study that was done out of Stanford where they would get kids to stand up and give a minute presentation. These intelligent, articulate kids that were then rated on 2 things. How well did they do with their presentation? And not surprising, the ones that were articulate and passionate, all those kind of things, they just rated the socks off stuff. And then later on, what they wanted to do is find out how much the kids remembered of those 1 minute speeches. And there was very little relation. The ones that remembered were the ones that told stories. And there was not necessarily any relationship between the kids that kind of won the awards, so to speak, that were the more passionate, amazing, articulate speakers there too. So what we want people is remembering what we tell them and telling stories, regardless of, they might not be inspiring. They might not, be any of those kind of things. The mere act that when you tell a story, you find a gateway, a doorway into the brain that makes the message much more sticky. Is that a schema?
Yeah, definitely. Yep. Yes,
So,
it is. A gateway is, for sure.
Yeah. So, stories, tell more of them, basically, I think is the nuts and bolts of that too. And don't get over concerned that it has to be, Hollywood style. Give the specifics with regards to the people. I love that feel, felt, found. Is a good way to go forwards.
Yeah, and I think just to reiterate what you're saying there, the reason that stories work so well is that it's the way, if we look back to that evolutionary perspective, that we're essentially cavemen working with this wiring that's optimized for a hunter-gatherer lifestyle,
Yes.
there was no Facebook, there was no internet, there was no books even. So
Yes.
human knowledge was passed by knowledge. So we have this, we're fundamentally wired to acquire knowledge this way. I mean,
Yes.
the Bible, without meaning to be insensitive, it's a collection of stories.
Yes.
And that they work, and they're still compelling for people now because we have that wiring for it. And again, as you say that, I'm guessing that as a caveman, you didn't have like a big Hollywood cliffhanger production schema to use. You just use that really simple structure of, I'm going to take you on a little journey here and give you some details about the other caveman's name so that you care about him. You can picture yourself as that person, and away we go.
Love it. So the book, gang, is made to stick. I really enjoyed the read. It was practical. There are things that I have already begun to implement because of it as well. Chip Heath, Dan Heath were the authors there. Hopefully Martin and I have given you more than a passing summary of, how you can start to implement. There's a lot that we've gone into in this, and I might be so self-serving as saying that this might be worth a second and third listen to go through and really kind of pick your way through the bits and pieces through any of those points as well. Martin, anything to kind of sum things up?
No, that I agree 100%. I think my experience was reading the book for a second time. There was way more in there than I expected. And I certainly think listening to the points that we've taken from it is probably worth a couple of listens. So as always, great to have a chat to you, and I've made more notes here from the takeaways that you had. So yeah, love it.
Love it, dudes. And so, hey, gang, if this has been helpful for you guys, reach out to Martin and I. And if it is, then we can do this on a semi-regular basis. We've got our Man Club book club anyway, and it wouldn't be too difficult for us to just hit record and share them with you if it's available. Thanks, dude.
Excellent. Great to see you, mate.
See ya. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.